Hollywood loves to gamble, but sometimes the stakes are higher than anyone dares admit. Imagine a single movie so disastrous it threatens to sink an entire studio. These weren't just box office disappointments, they were catastrophes, leaving financial wreckage, ruined reputations, and whispered rumors of corporate collapse. Today, we unearth 19 films that bombed so hard, they nearly ended the companies behind them. Let's begin. Number 19. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Once touted as the movie that would redefine epic filmmaking, Heaven's Gate became the cautionary tale whispered in studio boardrooms. United Artists gave director Michael Cimino near total control after his Oscar triumph with The Deer Hunter. What followed was cinematic excess on a staggering scale. The story, based loosely on the Johnson County War, paints an operatic clash between European immigrants and wealthy cattle barons in Wyoming. Cimino envisioned a poetic, sweeping saga. What audiences got was a nearly 4-hour sprawl, filled with breathtaking imagery but little narrative focus. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Sets were rebuilt on whims. Cimino demanded take after take, sometimes over 50, for minor scenes. Production ballooned from an estimated $11 million to over $44 million. Rumors swirled of animal cruelty during filming, and critics who saw the early cut savaged it. When the film premiered in November 1980, audiences stayed away. United Artists hemorrhaged money. The studio, once home to legends like Chaplin and Hitchcock, collapsed under the weight of the flop and was ultimately sold to MGM. And yet, decades later, cinephiles reappraised Heaven's Gate. What was once mocked as indulgent now gleams as a misunderstood masterpiece. Still, the damage was done. One man's vision had nearly destroyed a studio. The legacy? A haunting reminder that unchecked ambition can blur the line between genius and ruin. Number 18. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, 1988. Terry Gilliam was never afraid of risk, but with The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, he pushed Columbia Pictures to the edge of collapse. At its heart, the film was a fantastical tale of an old adventurer recounting impossible stories, riding cannonballs, traveling to the moon, and even visiting the belly of a sea monster. On paper, it was whimsical. On set, it was a nightmare. Gilliam's elaborate visions demanded sprawling sets, massive special effects, and logistical feats that constantly fell apart. Costs spiraled from a modest budget to an eye-watering $46 million. Money Columbia Pictures did not have to spare. Stories of disaster followed the production. Sets collapsed. Elaborate costumes and effects malfunctioned. The crew endured brutal conditions, and Gilliam's clashes with studio executives became legendary. Some whispered the movie was cursed, doomed from the moment cameras rolled. When it finally hit theaters in 1988, audiences barely noticed. The marketing budget had been gutted after Columbia panicked over spiraling expenses. The film made only $8 million worldwide, a catastrophic loss that sent shockwaves through the studio. And yet, like many Gilliam projects, Baron Munchausen gained a cult following. Critics who once scoffed later celebrated it as a wild, imaginative spectacle, an artist's refusal to bow to commercial compromise. Still, the truth remained. This one fantastical failure nearly ended Columbia. It showed that a dreamer's vision, without limits, can transform from magic to menace. Number 17. Cutthroat Island, 1995. It was supposed to revive the swashbuckling pirate adventure. Instead, Cutthroat Island became the film that nearly sank Coralco Pictures. Starring Gina Davis and Matthew Modine, the movie promised high-seas spectacle, treasure hunts, and daring sword fights. But from the start, the tide was against it. Production spiraled out of control. The script went through endless rewrites. Ship sets were destroyed by weather, forcing costly rebuilds. Davis's then-husband, Rennie Harlin, directed with relentless ambition, staging massive explosions and naval battles that drained the budget. Reports suggested Coralco poured close to $100 million into the project, an unfathomable sum for a pirate film at the time. The release was catastrophic. Critics mocked the stilted dialogue and cartoonish action. Audiences simply stayed away. The movie grossed a mere $10 million worldwide, not even scratching the surface of its bloated budget. It wasn't just a failure, it was a death blow. Coralco, once the powerhouse behind Terminator 2 and Basic Instinct, collapsed soon after. For years, the very word pirate movie carried a curse in Hollywood. It wasn't until Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, nearly a decade later, that studios dared return to the genre. Looking back, Cutthroat Island is remembered less as a film and more as a warning. Even grand spectacle can turn into quicksand when ambition outweighs discipline. Number 16. The Last Action Hero, 1993. At the height of Arnold Schwarzenegger's power, Columbia Pictures believed they had a guaranteed blockbuster. The Last Action Hero was pitched as both an action spectacle and a satire of action movies themselves. The premise was wild. A young boy is magically transported into the world of his favorite action hero, only to discover that fiction and reality collide in unexpected ways. But the execution proved disastrous. Rushed through production to beat Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park to theaters, the movie hit screens unfinished. The tonal shifts confused audiences. Was it a parody or a straight action flick? Meanwhile, critics pounced, calling it bloated, self-indulgent, and incoherent. Behind the scenes, executives panicked. Budgets ballooned to over $85 million. Marketing blitzes swallowed tens of millions more. The studio hyped it as the summer's biggest film. But when Jurassic Park roared into theaters just days earlier, The Last Action Hero was instantly overshadowed. The film grossed only $50 million domestically, an utter disaster compared to its massive investment. Columbia reeled from the loss, with insiders whispering that the misstep nearly crippled the studio entirely. And yet, with time, The Last Action Hero found defenders. Fans argue its meta-commentary on Hollywood excess was simply ahead of its time. But in 1993, it wasn't clever. It was catastrophic. Number 15. Mars Needs Moms, 2011. Few animated films have imploded as spectacularly as Disney's Mars Needs Moms. Produced through Robert Zemeckis' Image Movers digital studio, it was meant to showcase cutting-edge motion capture technology. Instead, it became one of the biggest animation flops in history. The story followed a young boy whisked away to Mars, where aliens abduct mothers to raise their children. On paper, it was a family-friendly adventure with heart. In execution, critics called it creepy and soulless, pointing to the uncanny valley of its digital characters. The emotional core simply didn't land. Behind the curtain, the budget ballooned to $150 million, astronomical for a mid-tier animated feature. Disney spent heavily on marketing, but audiences recoiled. Opening weekend brought in a pitiful $6 million. Worldwide grosses topped out at under $40 million, cementing it as one of the worst financial disasters in Disney's history. The fallout was immediate. Disney shut down Image Movers Digital, walking away from Zemeckis' costly experiment. The failure left studio executives shaken, sparking internal debates about the future of motion capture in mainstream animation. Today, Mars Needs Moms is remembered not for its story, but for its implosion. A film that was supposed to launch a new era of animation instead became shorthand for Hollywood hubris. Number 14. The 13th Warrior, 1999. If ever a film defined expensive misfire, it was The 13th Warrior. What began as a grand historical epic turned into one of Disney's biggest financial nightmares. Based on Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead, the film starred Antonio Banderas as an Arab ambassador who joins Norse warriors to battle mysterious invaders. Director John McTiernan, fresh off Die Hard, envisioned a gritty adventure, but test screenings were disastrous. The pacing dragged, audiences were confused, and the creature design drew laughter. Disney panicked and handed control to Crichton, who reshot and re-edited large portions, sending costs soaring from $60 million to over $160 million. When the movie finally released, critics pounced. They called it muddled and joyless, unsure whether it was a horror fantasy or war film. It grossed only $61 million worldwide, making it one of the decade's biggest money losers. Behind the scenes, Touchstone Pictures nearly collapsed under the financial hit. Projects were shelved, and McTiernan's career never recovered. For years, The 13th Warrior became a symbol of unchecked ambition and creative indecision, proof that even a studio with Disney's power could misjudge its audience. Today, it enjoys a faint cult following, admired for its dark tone and atmosphere. But in 1999, it was nothing short of a cinematic catastrophe that nearly buried a studio giant. Number 13. Ishtar, 1987. Few titles in Hollywood are as synonymous with disaster as Ishtar. Columbia Pictures gave Elaine May, already a brilliant but difficult filmmaker, tens of millions to craft a political comedy starring Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty. The premise? Two hapless lounge singers stumble into Cold War espionage in the Middle East. From the start, the production was a war zone. Shooting in the Moroccan desert brought brutal conditions. Camels collapsed, crew members fainted. Beatty and Hoffman allegedly clashed over who was funnier, while May demanded endless takes. The budget ballooned to over $50 million. Extraordinary for a comedy in the 80s. Critics tore it apart. Headlines declared it the worst film of the year. Audiences laughed, but not for the right reasons. The film earned only $14 million at the box office, and Columbia reeled. The studio, already vulnerable, nearly collapsed under the financial strain. But here's the twist. Over time, Ishtar found defenders. Critics like Richard Brody at The New Yorker argued it was unfairly maligned, an ambitious satire buried under the weight of its own reputation. Still, the damage was irreversible. For years, Ishtar became Hollywood's shorthand for box office bomb. Its name was invoked not as a movie, but as a warning. Number 12. The Lone Ranger, 2013. When Disney reunited Johnny Depp with the team behind Pirates of the Caribbean, they expected another billion-dollar franchise. What they got was The Lone Ranger, a bloated western that nearly burned the studio's empire to the ground. The film followed Armie Hammer as the Masked Ranger and Depp as Tonto, blending slapstick comedy with explosive action set pieces. But the tone never found balance. Critics questioned Depp's casting, while the story itself struggled under the weight of overindulgence. Behind the curtain, chaos reigned. Budgets spiraled past $250 million after reshoots and delays. Disney executives panicked, slashing scenes and marketing the movie as both gritty and family-friendly. Two visions that clashed disastrously. By release, the movie needed to make $500 million just to break even. Instead, it grossed only $260 million worldwide. Disney reported losses estimated at nearly $200 million. Panic spread within the company. Would their live-action strategy collapse? Insiders whispered the failure almost derailed Pirates of the Caribbean 5 and shook investor confidence in Disney's blockbuster model. Years later, The Lone Ranger remains a cinematic cautionary tale. A movie meant to relaunch a classic American hero instead became a ghost town of wasted potential. Number 11. Cleopatra, 1963. Before Heaven's Gate or Ishtar, there was Cleopatra, the granddaddy of all studio-killing flops. 20th Century Fox believed Elizabeth Taylor as the Queen of the Nile would deliver the most spectacular epic of all time. What they got instead nearly bankrupted the studio. The production began in London, but Taylor fell gravely ill. Filming shut down for months. Costly sets were scrapped and rebuilt in Rome. The budget ballooned from $2 million to over $30 million, the most expensive film ever made at the time. Richard Burton joined as Mark Antony, and tabloids feasted on his real-life affair with Taylor, fueling scandal. When Cleopatra finally premiered, it dazzled visually, but dragged at over 4 hours. Critics were divided. Some hailed the spectacle, others scoffed at its melodrama. Audiences were curious, but ticket sales couldn't possibly offset its enormous cost. The movie nearly closed Fox, forcing the studio to sell off its backlot and desperately greenlight projects like The Sound of Music just to stay afloat. Today, Cleopatra is remembered as both a shimmering relic and a financial fiasco, a crown jewel of spectacle that proved too heavy for its studio to bear. Number 10. John Carter, 2012. Disney dreamed of launching a sci-fi franchise to rival Star Wars. Instead, John Carter became one of the most notorious flops of the 21st century. Based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' pulp novels, the story followed a Civil War veteran transported to Mars, where he's drawn into an epic alien conflict. Director Andrew Stanton, fresh off Finding Nemo and Wall-E, envisioned a sweeping interplanetary saga, but trouble brewed from the start. Marketing failed spectacularly. Trailers avoided the word Mars, leaving audiences confused about what the movie was even about. Budgets ballooned to $250 million, while promotional campaigns consumed tens of millions more. When it hit theaters, critics were lukewarm, calling it overstuffed and unfocused. The box office collapsed, with worldwide grosses under $300 million, nowhere near enough to cover the investment. Analysts estimated Disney lost $200 million, sparking panic within the studio. The fallout was severe. Disney abandoned plans for sequels. Executives distanced themselves from Stanton's passion project. For years, John Carter became Hollywood's shorthand for blockbuster disaster. And yet, a small cult following later emerged, praising its earnest attempt at pulp adventure. Still, the damage was done, one flop, and Disney's bold franchise gamble turned to dust. Number 9. The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964. Before CGI armies marched across screens, Samuel Bronston attempted to stage the Roman Empire's collapse with sheer manpower and monumental sets. The Fall of the Roman Empire was envisioned as a sweeping epic, starring Sophia Loren, Stephen Boyd, and Christopher Plummer. The sets were colossal. An entire replica of the Roman Forum was built in Spain, but ambition spelled disaster. The film cost a then astronomical $20 million. When it premiered, critics dismissed it as ponderous and slow. Audiences, weary of bloated historical epics, stayed away. The film grossed a fraction of its cost, nearly crushing Bronston's independent empire of grand productions. Behind the scenes, creditors circled. Bronston's company collapsed under lawsuits and unpaid debts. Studios across Hollywood panicked, abandoning similar epic projects. It was as if one film had poisoned the entire genre. Years later, Ridley Scott's Gladiator would borrow heavily from the fall of the Roman Empire, reviving the sword and sandal spectacle. But by then, Bronston's dream was long gone, his empire in ruins. Its legacy? Proof that even Rome itself can fall, on screen and in the boardroom, when vision outruns reality. Number 8. Waterworld, 1995. Long before streaming memes turned it into a cult curiosity, Waterworld was feared as Kevin's Gate, a financial disaster that nearly drowned Universal Pictures. Kevin Costner, fresh off Dances with Wolves, starred in this post-apocalyptic tale set on an Earth consumed by rising seas. Humanity clung to floating atolls, while Costner's mutant mariner searched for the last scrap of dry land. From the outset, the production was cursed. Shot almost entirely on open water off the coast of Hawaii, sets repeatedly sank. Hurricanes destroyed elaborate floating cities, costing millions to rebuild. Crew members suffered sunstroke, dehydration, and constant seasickness. Costs exploded from $100 million to nearly $200 million, making it the most expensive movie ever produced at the time. When it finally opened, critics mocked its thin story and bizarre characters. Audiences were curious but underwhelmed, delivering a domestic gross of just $88 million. Though overseas receipts eventually softened the blow, the initial panic nearly capsized Universal's finances. In the years since, Waterworld has found new life through theme park attractions, video games, and cult reappraisals. What was once considered a catastrophic misfire now looks like an ambitious, if flawed, experiment. But in 1995, it was a flood of financial terror. Number 7. The Postman, 1997. If Waterworld was mocked as Kevin's Gate, The Postman was the nail in Costner's epic coffin. Warner Brothers banked on another, sweeping Costner-directed vision, this time a post-apocalyptic saga about a drifter who inspires hope by delivering mail across a shattered America. On paper, it was a story of redemption. On screen, it became a punchline. Shot in desolate Utah and Oregon, production was grueling. Costner clashed with writers, expanded his own role, and reportedly stretched the schedule far beyond budget. Warner Brothers watched nervously as the price tag climbed past $80 million. When it arrived on Christmas Day, critics savaged it as pretentious and humorless. Audiences fled, delivering a meager $17 million domestic gross. Newspapers declared it one of the worst flops of the decade. Behind the scenes, Warner executives panicked over the financial bloodbath. Some feared the disaster could derail their entire blockbuster slate. Costner's reputation as Hollywood's golden boy evaporated almost overnight. Decades later, a small fan base defends The Postman as misunderstood and oddly poetic. But its legacy is etched in Hollywood history. A film so disastrous it turned one man's ambition into a cautionary tale for every studio executive. Number 6. The Alamo, 2004. Disney thought they could recreate the gritty historical spectacle of Gladiator with The Alamo. Instead, they stumbled into one of the studio's costliest failures. Directed by John Lee Hancock, the film dramatized the legendary 1836 battle in which a small band of Texans faced overwhelming Mexican forces. But the production was doomed before cameras rolled. Budget estimates soared past $100 million, even after drastic cost-cutting measures. Disney executives interfered heavily, watering down darker story elements to ensure a family-friendly rating. What emerged was a muddled epic that satisfied no one. When The Alamo premiered, critics blasted its sluggish pacing and lack of emotional depth. Audiences shrugged, delivering just $22 million in domestic grosses. The international market barely noticed. Losses approached $100 million, a catastrophic blow. The fallout within Disney was immediate. Executives abandoned plans for further historical epics, pivoting instead towards safer franchises. For years, The Alamo was cited as proof that Disney could fail spectacularly outside the fantasy and animation genres. Today, the film lingers as a ghost, an ambitious attempt buried under boardroom compromise, a reminder that even stories of heroism can collapse when vision is sacrificed at the altar of studio caution. Number 5. The New World, 2005. Terrence Malick's The New World was supposed to be art disguised as epic, the story of Pocahontas and John Smith, told with poetic whispers and sweeping natural imagery. New Line Cinema believed Malick's vision would earn awards and prestige. Instead, it nearly emptied their coffers. The film's production was slow and meticulous. Malick insisted on natural light, authentic period, detail, and hours upon hours of improvisational shooting. Sets were elaborate, costumes painstakingly recreated, and schedules stretched endlessly. The budget swelled to over $30 million, far above what the studio could safely risk on a director famous for taking decades between projects. When it finally premiered, critics were divided. Some hailed it as transcendent art, others called it ponderous and incomprehensible. Audiences expecting a romantic adventure recoiled from Malick's meditative pace. The movie grossed less than $30 million worldwide, barely covering its costs. For New Line, the film's weak box office was disastrous. Executives who had gambled on prestige panicked, and Malick's reputation as an elusive genius nearly destroyed his chances of working again. Years later, cinephiles rediscovered The New World, praising its dreamlike beauty. But in 2005, it was a commercial disaster, proof that artistic daring could turn into financial quicksand. Number 4. Speed Racer, 2008. The Wachowskis, fresh off the Matrix trilogy, aimed to reinvent the childhood anime Speed Racer for the 21st century. Warner Bros. Envisioned a neon-drenched blockbuster blending cutting-edge CGI with cartoon logic. What emerged was a kaleidoscopic spectacle, wildly ambitious but fatally flawed. The production was plagued by ballooning costs. With elaborate digital backdrops and stylized effects, the budget shot past $120 million. Critics were baffled. Some praised its candy-colored audacity. Most dismissed it as incoherent chaos. Marketing failed to sell the film's hyper-stylized aesthetic. Families found it too strange. Adults found it too childish. The result? A worldwide gross of just $93 million, far below break-even. Warner Bros. Lost tens of millions, and some insiders feared the Wachowskis' careers were finished. But here's the twist. Speed Racer refused to die. Over the years, a cult audience embraced it as a misunderstood masterpiece, an ahead-of-its-time visual experiment that anticipated modern superhero aesthetics. What was once a flop now inspires a loyal devotion. Still, in 2008, it nearly derailed a studio's summer slate, a warning that style without mass appeal can be just as lethal as no style at all. Number 3. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, 2017. Warner Bros. Thought they had a franchise. Guy Ritchie's King Arthur, Legend of the Sword was meant to launch a 6-film saga retelling the Arthurian myth with swagger and grit. Instead, it became one of the studio's most expensive disasters. The production was chaotic. Ritchie's stylistic flourishes clashed with endless rewrites and reshoots. Budgets ballooned to $175 million. CGI-heavy set pieces and a bloated schedule only added to the cost. Studio executives, already nervous, pushed for changes that further muddled the film's tone. When it finally opened, critics tore it apart, calling it hollow spectacle. Audiences weren't fooled. The movie earned a pathetic $15 million in its opening weekend. Worldwide grosses topped out at 148 million, tens of millions short of profitability. Losses were estimated at nearly $150 million. The fallout was swift. Warner Brothers abandoned its plans for a King Arthur cinematic universe. Ritchie's blockbuster reputation took a beating. For years afterward, King Arthur was cited as a textbook example of studio hubris, when ambition collides with poor planning. Its legacy? A broken crown on the battlefield of modern blockbusters, proving that even legends can crumble when weighed down by impossible expectations. Number 2. Battlefield Earth, 2000. Few films in history are as infamous as Battlefield Earth. Based on the science fiction novel by L. Ron Hubbard, John Travolta pitched it as a passion project and convinced Franchise Pictures to gamble on it. What followed was a disaster so total it nearly annihilated the studio. The story, set in the year 3000, follows humanity enslaved by alien overlords known as Cyclos. Travolta played the villain Turl, a sneering, dreadlocked conqueror, but the execution was comical. Critics mocked its awkward dialogue, garish camera angles, and cheap-looking sets. Roger Ebert famously declared it a travesty of filmmaking. Behind the scenes, chaos was constant. Travolta's star power clashed with inexperienced producers. Franchise Pictures inflated production costs through shady accounting, reporting a $73 million budget while allegedly funneling funds elsewhere. The result looked like a made-for-TV movie. When it opened, audiences fled. The film grossed a humiliating $29 million worldwide. Franchise Pictures was buried in lawsuits and debt. Within a few years, the company collapsed completely. And yet, Battlefield Earth achieved a strange afterlife. It became a cult phenomenon for all the wrong reasons. Midnight screenings mocked it. Critics dissected it as a case study in hubris. Its legacy? Proof that sometimes a movie doesn't just flop, it detonates, taking its studio down with it. Number 1. The Golden Compass, 2007. New Line Cinema envisioned The Golden Compass as the next Lord of the Rings. Based on Philip Pullman's acclaimed novel, it promised fantasy spectacle with armored polar bears, dazzling effects, and Nicole Kidman leading the cast. But instead of glory, it delivered catastrophe. Production ballooned to $180 million. Studio executives interfered heavily, fearing backlash over the book's controversial themes. Key plot points about religion and authority were softened or stripped away. What should have been a bold, challenging epic was reduced to a watered-down spectacle. Critics called it hollow, stripped of the very ideas that made the novel powerful. Audiences were lukewarm. In the United States, the film grossed only $70 million. International receipts helped push the total to $372 million, but with marketing and production costs, New Line faced losses in the hundreds of millions. The fallout was immediate and brutal. New Line, once an independent powerhouse, was absorbed into Warner Brothers. The dream of a His Dark Materials trilogy vanished overnight. Years later, HBO and BBC revived Pullman's work as a television series, proof that the story could thrive with care. But the film's legacy remains a grim warning. Ambition without conviction can destroy even the mightiest studio. 19 films, 19 catastrophes. Each one a reminder that in Hollywood, glory and ruin are separated by a razor's edge. These weren't just bad movies. They were gambles that nearly erased entire studios from history. So, which of these disasters shocked you most? Let us know below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next deep dive.